Welcome to the Center for Creative Leadership webinar, 5 Disruptive Organizational Trends Affecting Leaders in the Next 5 Years. It's presented by Cheryl Flink and David Altman of the Center for Creative Leadership, also known as CCL. My name is Tracy Dobbins, and I'll serve as your webinar moderator today. And at the Center for Creative Leadership, our sole focus is leadership development, education, and research. We're excited to share the details of our new study, which asked executives around the world to name their most significant disruptive trends shaping their organization in coming years. With us today, we have Cheryl Flink and David Altman. Cheryl leads the Global Research and Evaluation and Leadership Analytics functions at the Center for Creative Leadership. David Altman is the Chief Operating Officer at CCL. Welcome, Cheryl and David. I'll now turn the session over to David.
Hello, everybody. So disruption is always present, but now there's additional uncertainty given coronavirus's global impact. I don't need to say that the entire world is being challenged to be agile in the face of this massive disruption. The material that we're going to present to you today were collected before the pandemic hit, but it's certainly relevant to leading during the era of COVID-19 and the future disruptions that we will undoubtedly face. If you look at a definition of disruption in a dictionary, it talks about a break or interruption in the normal course or in the continuation of an activity. And with COVID-19, we're reminded that leaders must expect, must embrace, and must plan for interruptions and disruptions. These interruptions can be big, as we're facing today, or not so big. And we need to accept forever now that whatever we label as normal today is fleeting because the world is in a constant state of change. And in fact, we should probably remove the word normal from our expectations. One of the CEOs that we've been working with, and we talked to him last week, talked about black swan events or, events that were extreme, very rare and severe. And he said, I thought I knew what black swan events were until COVID hit. Now my whole mindset and view of the world has changed, and it will forever influence the way that I lead.
David, thank you for that introduction. And what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about the research and how it was conducted. As David alluded to, this was conducted before the COVID-19 pandemic hit us. But what we had done was to understand the state of disruption and its implications. Our research team of Holly Downs, Sunil Puri, and Lynn Collins conducted a study with global senior leaders. And we asked them to tell us what they anticipate to be the 5 major trends that will most disrupt their businesses over the next 5 years. We asked questions to understand the innate tensions that leaders and teams face and how they leverage or respond to those forces. And as Dave noted, those kinds of tensions, what's happening today, is all pertinent to the global pandemic. We did find, however, as the title alludes to, that in the face of this, in the face of the coronavirus, in all of these disruptive forces, it is people who are going to make the difference. And that is a little bit about what we'll talk about as we move forward throughout the research. We conducted the research in 2 phases. Phase 1 included in-depth interviews with 18 global C-suite executives. And in these conversations, these execs provided their perspectives on the top future trends they see impacting their businesses, either positively or negatively. In these interviews, we coupled a set of 14 industry reports with those, and then we created a list of potential trends that were then used in the quantitative survey. From a set of 9 possible trends then, in that quantitative survey, respondents chose the top 3 that they believed would have the most impact on their business. We had over 500 respondents, and they represented folks around the globe. We will, when we send out the deck for this webinar, you will have in the appendix the distribution of the people who participated. From the set of 9 possible trends, you can see that there are 5 that we will be talking about today. And I want, when you go through and you listen to us, I think it'll be important to look at and think about the idea of polarities. We're going to discuss what those are and how to think about managing them as we go through. So, David, I know CCL has done some groundbreaking research on polarities. We talk about them as not being problems. A problem can have a right or a best answer. A solution actually exists. But a polarity is a paradox. It's a dilemma. It's hard to solve. So during the coronavirus, what polarities do you think CCL and our clients are managing, David?
Yeah, I think COVID-19 is really a case study in polarity. Certainly there are problems that we're trying to solve, but so many of the issues we're facing are polarities. So for example, organizations are struggling with the here and now, the present, how to run the business, how to save a business, and they're trying to build a business for the future. Likewise, they're thinking about how do I invest in our organizations in order to thrive in the future, and how do I cut costs today so we even make it to the future. And then finally, among others, from an individual leader view, how can I be empathetic with the pain and concern that people have and the fear that they have, and how can I make tough decisions that are needed to ensure that we have a future?
David, I really appreciate how you describe those. I think they're really great introductions to the polarities. And for our audience, again, as we go through each of these trends, there will be a key polarity for you to think about as we talk about the tensions that are in these. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to David, and we are going to talk about our first trend.
Okay, so the first trend is big data and analytics. So obviously these are hot topics. Abundant and accessible data can reveal trends that can drive better decision making, that can help individuals, teams, and organizations perform at a higher level. And, you know, at the root of big data and analytics is a deep understanding of human behaviors. Organizations are leveraging big data and analytics to do all sorts of things. It's informing strategic planning. It's informing financial forecasting. It's helping with talent management, talent identification. It's helping drive new product development. It's helping improve customer experience. And in today's age, as you probably read in the news, high-tech companies are actually using big data and analytics to develop vaccines and to develop better treatment regimens. Now, it's very easy to talk about the upsides of data, but there's downsides as well. In the last couple of days, you've seen Zoom get in trouble around issues of data privacy and data security, which is a core downside that needs to be managed of big data and analytics. Some people and some organizations are paralyzed by all the data that they have. Other organizations are troubled by or are dealing with the quality of data. Organizations across the globe are struggling with identifying people, talent, who are data savvy and building organizational cultures that embrace data as a core part of their strategy. So the downsides all have to do with the human elements to disruption, which is the title of this webinar. So we're going to come back to that theme quite a bit. So what you see in this slide here, let me orient you because you're going to see this slide. It'll eventually be a 3-column slide for the 5 trends. So on the left column, which is what you're seeing now, this represents verbatim comments, a sample of them from our research. And these are the positive benefits. The middle column will be how the trends impact individual leaders, and the right column focuses on how the trends impact organizations. So benefits, individual leader impact, organizational impact. Okay, so on this slide here are a summary of some of the comments from respondents. So what we're seeing is that respondents understand the power of big data. They see how it can drive positive change. They see how it can improve competitive advantage and increase the focus on the customer. And they recognize the need to upskill people in data and data analytics, to change the infrastructure of the organization, to look at processes and culture so as to optimize the impact of big data. We're working with a big global telecom company right now, and they're trying to scale out 5G and be a big digital disruptor. And what they've come to understand is that it's not so much the technical aspects, which of course are complicated and there's a lot of data underneath it, but it's the human element. How do they get their organization set up in such a way that they can optimize this technological advantage that they have? Okay, so the second column, as I said before, these are impact on individual leaders. So what we see here in summary form is people that we spoke to express concern about the level of awareness and understanding about big data, and they especially are concerned about older workers. So in the telco that I just spoke about, we work with the C-suite, the highest level, and there's hundreds of these people in this big telco. And we also work with middle managers. And to the credit, the C-suite of this telco understood their own limitations. And they've come to understand that for the culture to change, for them to realize the full potential of 5G, they need to drive their leadership development work deep into the organization, because it's in the middle of the organization where culture is held and culture is executed. And then the third column, again in summary form, impact on the organization. So despite the promise of big data, people that we spoke to were worried about the lack of resources dedicated to it and the ability to in a broad and deep way, uplift the skill sets throughout the organization to realize the potential of big data and analytics. And these comments remind us to think about both data and the people in org culture who are the owners and users of the data. So Cheryl talked about polarities a few minutes ago. Let's go to the next slide. So the polarity of big data might be thought about as data democratization and data literacy. So organizations are counting on the power of data to make faster, smarter decisions. And next slide, they're confronted by the current limits of their people and their org culture as they try to leverage it. So data is widely available. It's democratized. Everybody has access to it. And just because you have access doesn't mean that you're using it to the advantage of the organization. And that is a key polarity or tension. Now, poor analysis is going to lead to poor decisions. Not having enough good data is going to lead to all kinds of negative outcomes. So despite the potential of big data and the access that we have to big data and analytic techniques, we must not forget to pay attention to the organizational culture, the DNA needed to extract the full benefit of data. So a couple of key strategies to unlock the power of data and analytics. Okay, so for you, next slide. So for your organizations to make data-driven decisions, that is to really unlock the power of data, obviously the expertise and skill of your people, the individual skills of individuals and the skill of the collective is required. Our people and organizations must be able to gather, interpret, and talk comfortably about data. And so starting point, of course, is to gauge our people's technical savvy and data fluency and their critical thinking, their influence skills, their communication skills. It's one thing to be data fluent, but can you then use that fluency to have a bigger mind, to be a more critical thinker, and to be able to communicate that? So it is more than having technical skills. What's key is having people deeply understand the stories within the data, having insights and being able to connect the dots between a lot of different data points and to tell the stories that are compelling and memorable. As an aside, when I work with C-suite execs and we're talking about or debriefing their 360, the question that I always ask is, What's the story in your data, in your 360 data? And every time I ask this question, the C-suite person just is surprised by that, steps back. They're so caught up in the particulars of the data, they lose track of the story. And the same thing applies to data analytics and big data. So what's important here is to focus on technical and non-technical competencies and mindsets. So we work with a lot of organizations interested in experience-driven development. Think of it as learning by doing. So I think a practical implication here is consider how you and your organization can unlock the power of big data and analytics by doing a variety of things. Give people stretch assignments and short-term rotations in ways that will help them learn new skills and develop new mindsets. Give leaders and teams ongoing feedback so that they can get better over time with data and analytics. And strengthen people's communication and listening skills so that people have the ability to really have candid conversations with one another around data. And then soon I'm going to end on this trend, one last strategy to talk about. The other thing I think organizations need to do a better job at is being able to make data-driven decisions in an organizational and have an organizational culture that supports it. So as I said before, it's not just about the skills of individuals. The organization itself, the DNA of the organization, the culture must become more data literate and embrace data in order to allow insights from the data to flow freely up and down and across the organization. So, a question to reflect on is how would you rate your organization on data literacy, data savviness? How well do you tell data stories? How well do data inform what decision makers do? So it's important to increase the...
Sorry, David. I have the honor of watching the chat, and there's a really interesting question that just came up, which is there's a step before data-driven decision-making, which is decision-driven data collection. And I just wanted to comment on how important that is when organizations think they're going to be able to make decisions. They've got strategies in place, but they've never thought about the data strategy for collecting the data. So it's a really good, important point as David talks about the ability to transform culture, to set policies and procedures. The data needs to exist in the first place that you want to leverage. Just thought I'd put that question to you.
Yeah, that's a really insightful question and a great response, Cheryl. For those of you that are researchers, in the research field, you make a distinction between hypothesis generation and hypothesis testing. So the question really gets at the generation and at the testing. So sometimes you're just doing exploration and sometimes you're testing, but a priori, before the fact, you need to think about what you're going to do with the data. Otherwise, you're wasting everybody's time. So thank you for that. So in terms of this slide, right-hand column, so it's important to think about collective capacity. In a sense, what we're talking about is growing bigger minds in our organizations, intervening on the mindsets that people have, their capabilities, their perspectives, commensurate with the power of bigger data. In the field of leadership development, you could look it up at ccl.org or elsewhere. Look up vertical development. It's kind of like Piaget, development of child development and stages of development. Just like child development, adults develop and organizations develop. And what we're trying to do with this trend is develop vertically so that we can see things in different ways and not be stuck in the ways of the past. Okay, so kind of the takeaway here on the slide, we need to upskill our talent. We need to upgrade our culture. And if we do that, we're going to be able to unlock the power of big data. If all we're focused on are the technical aspects of data and analytics, we're going to fall short and be disappointed. Okay, so the second trend we're going to talk about, and then I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl, is agile innovation. So this trend in part speaks to a key part of human nature. It's our tribal orientation, and that certainly plays out today in response to COVID. Just look at the way, good ways and bad ways, that different countries or different states in the U.S. or different communities within states are engaging in tribal behavior, which historically, genetically, protects us, but it also sets up barriers. So in organizational settings, when we talk to clients, pretty much every conversation is around silos and stovepipes and boundaries, and a driver of that is social and organizational identity. And so many organizations come to CCL with the challenges around spanning silos. We call it boundary spanning leadership, which you can also look up. So as all of you know, innovation is not the exclusive focus of people in R&D or people with innovation in their titles or people who are, data scientists looking for new ways of addressing problems. Innovation happens all over organizations. And so much of that innovation doesn't see the light of day because it's buried in the silos. So Agile refers to individual behaviors, to org culture, and, a key question to ask yourself and to ask others, leaders in the organization, is this: is failure an option? How is failure handled? How have we learned from failure? What do we do when failure happens? And if the answers are we don't accept failure, we don't handle it, we people who fail or teams that fail, we replace them with new teams or new people, all right, you're going to have a hard time being good at this trend, Agile innovation. So with Agile innovation, it really is around cross-functional and interdependent teams who can work quickly together, gather diverse input, create multiple iterations, create solutions not in isolation, but across all kinds of boundaries. And organizations that do that tend to innovate rapidly. So the next slide, you'll see the same format of the slides in the first trend, big data. So the benefits that came up from interviews with respondents were more than ever, Agile innovation is needed. We need to approach it in a time-urgent way. We need to do a better job with cross-functional alignment. Okay, next slide. And then when we asked about the impact on individuals, we heard that leaders need to foster thinking, again, that spans the enterprise and that encourages collaboration. There needs to be more tolerance of risk. There needs to be deeper trust between people. If you haven't read the literature on psychological safety, Amy Edmondson at Harvard, I'd highly recommend it. But it's the ability to kind of speak the truth. And when we do that, we're more able to actually innovate because failure is embraced and we don't throw people under the bus. And then the next slide is around the impact on the organization. And here you'll see comments around interpersonal savvy and teamwork and communication, which we're going to talk about later on in the interview. By the way, you'll get this entire deck. So I know this is a bit of an eye chart, and you're not going to be able to read it all, but you'll have access to this later. So we get now back to the issue of polarity. So in Agile innovation, one of the polarities is rapid innovation and risk management. So leaders are challenged by the polarity of innovating rapidly in a world in which rapid innovation is the key to survival, literally, and managing the inherent risks of innovation consuming resources, of failure after failure, going down rabbit holes, not paying enough to the products and services of today that are driving revenue and impact. So if there's high aversion to risk, that's going to kill anything but small incremental innovation. So we need rapid innovation and we need risk management. And how do we live on the upside of both of those? So throughout organizations, people need to have the mindsets and behaviors. Go back to the previous slide. The mindsets and behaviors that foster and reinforce innovation and collaboration in order to really innovate. And in order to do that, and I've mentioned this before, trust, psychological safety, openness, candid dialogue, and the like. Okay, next slide. Okay, so how do we craft an innovation culture and be a champion of Agile innovation? Well, I think this requires, and now it's the third time I've mentioned it, risk tolerance. It requires a culture where creativity can thrive. Consider whether your leaders are unwittingly or unintentionally actually undermining innovation that the organization needs and wants. This happens a lot. And that happens through what leaders say, but also the unspoken messages that they send. What's being reinforced? What's being rewarded? What's being punished? Who are getting promotions? And if you're not sure at whether this is happening in your organization, look at how people in your organization work. How siloed is it? How cautious are people? Go to the employee manuals and how policies are enacted. And what does that say about your culture? Okay, next slide. So in terms of a couple strategies, humans naturally sort themselves by expertise, by where they work, by demographics, by level in the organization, and those boundaries don't disappear automatically when people are assigned to work on a project or work on a team or work on a problem. So until relationships are well established and until the culture accepts differences and diversity and working across boundaries, people are going to be cautious about co-developing ideas, about pursuing Agile innovation. They're going to be cautious about iterating. And now in this day and age where we're all working remotely, the physical distance can really, it can promote collaboration. We're seeing this at CCL right now. Despite the fact we're global, we have people all over the globe, we're actually collaborating more and being more agile and innovative than we've ever been. So we've been able to figure out how to do that. Other organizations haven't. Next slide. So to promote that kind of cross-boundary collaboration, remind people to facilitate the group relationships, not just team outputs. Establish norms and shared understanding that is supportive of Agile innovation. Recognize the challenges and opportunities that physical distance and working remotely bring. And build these virtual meetings, even though technology is part of it, try to create real-time connections. You know, the word today is social distancing. We like to think about it as physical distancing and social connection. So how can we be socially connected even though we are physically separated? Okay. And then finally, the second set of cultural strategies to promote an Agile innovation culture. It requires support for experimentation and collaboration. It requires support of candid, difficult conversations up and down and across the organization where people are feeling free to unleash the ideas that they have to challenge the status quo, to challenge each other, but everybody has each other's backs. And when those conversations are flowing that way, you can still be in a hierarchy, but you're going to be unleashing so many more ideas than would otherwise occur. And then before I turn it over to Cheryl, on this slide, what you're going to see is far too often we've seen leaders subconsciously sabotage innovation because they behave in ways that basically kill new ideas. And sometimes that sabotage isn't deliberate. They do want to foster innovation, but they don't know how to support it and support failure. And so there are a variety of techniques that one can use to do that. So if you see that happening in your organization, intervene. And then the last slide on this trend is collaboration, psychological safety, candid conversations. That's what enable a culture of Agile innovation. And that's what we need in this day and age. Okay, over to you, Cheryl.
Okay, thank you, David. And I think those things that we've learned from big data and from Agile innovation, you're going to see some threads that will feed into this next topic, which is artificial intelligence. And as you all know, artificial intelligence is not a future technology. It is here, it is now, Companies are experimenting with and implementing machine learning, robotics, virtual reality, all kinds of new technologies. There is such promise in AI, and there's a number of challenges that we're negotiating in this difficult world between man-machine interactions. We'll talk about how some of that is playing out, particularly today with COVID-19. So let's take a look at what our respondents had to say about AI. They do see the promise. They absolutely see that it is going to lead them towards a competitive advantage. They believe that their investment in product innovation will play out. They understand customer needs will come through AI algorithms as they look at how to process the data that customers are feeding them, whether those are B2B or B2C customers, and personalization. When they think about leadership, however, they're also thinking about the greater demands on leaders as they need to manage the appropriate use of automation. What should a human do? What should a machine do? And the shift in job requirements for talent. Leaders are going to have to be more visionary. They're going to have more soft skills. They're going to have to think very carefully about the implications of AI algorithms that they build, about potential bias. So those skills are going to become very important for individual leaders. In addition, when we think about the cultural shift, you can imagine as the entire world is thinking about what happens with physical distance social connection, what happens when we have to understand the implications of AI and how it's playing out today? What are the restraints that need to be placed? And although leaders are thinking about the shifts in talent, how to automate repetitive tasks, they're also very clear that decision-making and strategic thinking cannot be replaced. Okay, so we'll talk more about that as well. In sum, then, our leaders have identified a polarity, and that polarity is the automation and people. Artificial intelligence will drastically improve both the quality and speed of tasks previously done by humans, and to stay on the cutting edge, organizations have to reinvest in what will differentiate their people. So let's talk about some of the skills that will be required about that. And I think one thing that's interesting when you think about the people skills in the era of AI is, what does AI mean for a brand? I spoke earlier about how virtually all companies can see AI as a competitive advantage, but the way it plays out may be dependent on your brand and what you're trying to accomplish and where you'll need those people skills. So let's be mindful of that and think about a couple of very contemporary examples. In the world of QSR right now, robots are being used to prepare meals. Natural language processing is coming up as a way to place an order at a drive-through restaurant, and certainly they are exploring the use of driverless cars to deliver food. Those are all brand-appropriate things, and in the midst of COVID-19, they might be especially brand-appropriate as we try to limit physical contact and the spread of the virus. In fact, the coronavirus might actually accelerate the use of AI in the restaurant industry and really disrupt it. What does that mean for the leaders of restaurant industry, especially those who are in the QSR industry? On the other hand, deeply personalized technology products like cell phones may continue to require a really high-touch sales process where they need to help you determine what type of operating system do I want? Do I want to be with an Apple or do I want to be with Google? How do I set that up? And that process of being with a person may be very important to the brand. So leaders are going to be needing to think carefully about what AI means for their brand and for their culture. When we think about the futures of AI, there are a couple of strategies that we need to be looking at. Obviously, people skills are going to become a fundamental differentiator as leaders start looking at the impact to teams where the tasks become automated. That's going to be very sensitive. It's going to require two sets of things that we think about at CCL. One is what we've identified as 4 people skills, the fundamental 4. These fundamental 4 leadership skills include self-awareness, communication, influence, and learning agility. They will be critical components for setting strategy and making decisions, the things that humans are best at. And even the most enthusiastic proponents of AI believe that the ability of machines to make decisions is at least 10 years away. So as we move away from repetitive tasks, critical thinking, strategic thinking, visioning is going to become extraordinarily important. And these fundamental four are going to help leaders navigate that new normal, if we can always use that word. In addition, especially right now when we face a crisis that's more devastating than most of us have ever experienced, and I hope we'll ever experience in our lifetimes, empathy becomes a critical skill. Empathy can be learned. That's important. Empathy can be learned if people are not particularly empathic leaders. It's a place to focus right now. And leaders will need to learn to listen, to take others' perspectives, to be compassionate, and to think globally. What team members living in Spain and Italy are experiencing right now is fundamentally different from those living in Germany or the US. I was on a webinar with a colleague in Italy, and he was describing the complete and total lockdown there, including to having to have paperwork to show why you needed to be on the street to go to the pharmacy. That is far different from what I am experiencing in Greensboro, North Carolina. And so that empathic perspective is going to be incredibly important as you work in the field of AI and its implications for right now. Another area where AI is being used, and there's both a cautionary and a good note here, is identifying and developing the talent needed to implement an organization's strategy. And we certainly had respondents talking about this and thinking about how does that implicate our talent, how does it have an implication on the talent that we are bringing in and identifying. AI can leverage information from employee engagement surveys, from competency data, from digital traces found in communication platforms, things like Teams or Slack, social media platforms like Twitter and Glassdoor. And that data can be used in predictive modeling to understand how investments in leadership development and organizational culture can impact hard business KPIs like revenue and margin or even innovation. So thinking about the types of data that you can leverage to drive business outcomes is one way that AI can be used. It's also very likely that the talent development initiatives that you need to invest in for the future are going to be very different than those you've focused on in the past. So it's really critical that you refresh your organization's understanding of the leadership competencies, the team dynamics, and the organizational culture that will be required as AI becomes embedded in the fabric of your work. What do we need to go back and reassess from yesterday, in some cases literally yesterday, to the future? So as a recap, leaders will want to reinvest their savings from AI into increasing the value of what makes their people uniquely human. They need to strengthen traditional soft skills and the personal touch, align the talent strategy with the business strategy, and ensure that the AI strategy is aligned with the brand strategy. It's all going to be about how companies can set themselves apart in the future. I'd like to talk about one last trend before I turn it back over to David, and this is one that's important to all of us. Increasingly, organizations have really high expectations and significant goals around the concepts of equity, diversity, and inclusion, or what we would call at CCL EDI. In our survey, respondents were given a definition of EDI as ensuring fair treatment, representing all identities and differences, and building a culture of belonging. So let's take a look at what respondents saw as some of the promises and some of the challenges. Respondents do believe that diversity of thought can accelerate the ability of teams to achieve their goals. They understand that diversity of thought is important to customers who have an increasing number of requirements that vendors and partners demonstrate diversity. They may lose RFPs and lose the ability to work with customers if they cannot demonstrate that. And they acknowledge that a diverse, inclusive company attracts top talent. So there's lots of acknowledgement of the importance, both for their company, competitively, for contracts, and to hire the best talent. They also recognize that EDI is a new standard of leadership, that representation matters, that diverse teams can reduce business risk and create very broad perspectives that they need to take advantage of. Perhaps most importantly, and I loved this understanding when we looked through the comments, is that EDI initiatives are not a check-the-box exercise. You don't get to put a check mark in and say, we have done it. It is a journey, and it's a long-lasting journey that never stops. In the polarity of EDI, then, you can think about a frustration that people also talked about. That polarity is that we are aware, we're talking about it, we're creating the ability to understand what it is, but it's hard to create new norms. Bias exists. People understand that numbers matter, but it's not the only thing. And there has to be a change in the way that we think about inclusiveness, truly being inclusive. So that polarity shows up then on the way that leaders think about this is the polarity is around creating awareness and sustaining impact. And so executives understand the best benefits of diversity. They recognize the need for more equity and inclusion. They're very clear on it. And they're unsure how to move from awareness to action and real impact. It's really hard to do. So let's talk about some strategies that you might want to employ to do that. And at CCL, I think a really useful framework is thinking about the real framework. We articulate to ourselves and to others, and in this framework, what we need to do in the world of EDI as real. We need to understand and identify or reveal relevant opportunities for EDI. We need to elevate equity. We need to activate diversity, and we need to lead inclusively. It's a nice framework to begin thinking about, and let's look at how a couple of strategies play out for that. We believe at CCL that it takes time, but equity is absolutely the place to start. Without equity, efforts to promote diversity and inclusion are really laudable, but they're not sustainable. Organizations that prioritize equity first take action to ensure all people have fair opportunities to reach their full potential. Now, that sounds very esoteric, but let's take a couple of examples. What does equity look like? It might mean thinking about where you recruit. You require that recruits come from an Ivy League school that are hard to enter, maybe for more privileged people with more money, or would you consider exceptional students from a state university? When you look at job candidates, do they reflect the CEO's network, or do they reflect a truly diverse slate that comes from many, many different sources? These are just simple things to begin thinking about in your organization. A second strategy that we'd like to look at on the next page, Tracy, would be the ability to look at network analytics. With network analytics, it can be such a good picture of what is going on in your organization. And one of the things that I think you can do is, let's suppose that you had built a team of 50 people that you consider to be pretty ethically diverse. The numbers are there. So maybe you've given yourself a pat on the back and you think, okay, I can check the box. We're diverse. We've got 50 different people. It's very ethnically diverse, and I can be done with that. But what if you actually looked at the network in the team? Who's talking to whom? With what frequency? With what richness? Does the network show communication only between members of the same ethnic groups, or does it show it across the whole team? Do the numbers that you have actually represent inclusiveness? So think about networks. Networks can really quickly disabuse all of us of the false assumptions that EDI depends on numbers. Once the network is understood, you can then start to leverage any number of solutions to enrich it. You can think about communication and feedback loops, about team task assignments, about meeting dynamics, maybe about mentorship versus sponsorship. Very, very different concepts. All of those techniques can help you harness the power of a really diverse team in a dynamic network. So just to recap that, at CCL, our perspective is that diversity and inclusion initiatives are more effective, that it is a culture of equity that is the foundation of what we want to build. With that, I'm going to turn this back over to Dave to address our last trend, which is communication.
Okay, well, this is an oldie but goodie topic, so I'm not going to belabor it. With coronavirus disrupting so much of our world, communication has become essential to our survival, literally and figuratively. And in general, we still aren't all that good at it. Leaders of today have to communicate about how to stay safe. They must calm fears. They must convey hope and aspirations, while at the same time they're cutting budgets and people. And we must share as leaders lessons about crisis management when the crises of today are bigger and more complex than what we've faced in our lifetime. And we're doing that all virtually. So the challenges are real and they're big. So what leaders told us about communication is they reinforce really what we all know. Communication is a strategic imperative that builds alignment, improves morale, reduces errors, and creates connectivity between people. In times of crisis, being vigilant about communicating effectively, indeed over-communicating, is going to be key to our success as leaders. On the next slide, you'll see a variety of topics, benefits around setting direction, around the importance of still having face-to-face connection, picking up nonverbals, which you can do with technology, but you miss out a little bit. And leaders need to continue to hone their skills on communication. And then the next slide focuses on the impact on organizations. And with COVID-19, this is going to fundamentally change the way we communicate. And it is right now, but we can't anticipate how this is going to change even more as the pandemic goes on and as we face recurrence of that. So the norms of communication in place even a few months ago aren't going to come back in their same form. So we need to be experimenting now about how we create deeper connections while we're socially distanced. So the polarity here that comes up commonly in communication is my team and the organization. So for decades, effectively communicating information and ideas has been rated consistently as one of the most successful skill sets of leaders. But it's easier said than done in a world of abundant communication channels and all kinds of information and complexity. And so we need to sort of have a focus on our team, on the people that we work with day in and day out, but not to the exclusion of the larger enterprise, the organization. And if we can cross those boundaries and communicate across different tribes that we work with, we'll effectively manage this polarity. And of course, there's communication overload, next slide, that so many of us face. We assume that communication is easier than in the past because we have so many available tools to facilitate it. And while those tools help get work done, at least they're designed to do so, they also create challenges and stresses. And we're constantly managing that, and the real test is happening right now. Can we stay together as cohesive groups of people despite being physically separated? Okay. And in terms of strategies, While organizations may not be able to scale back demands or cut down on the pace and volume of communication and information available, we can help people deal with it and be more resilient and manage their stress. Next slide. So provide clear signals that your culture values wellness by setting norms around email after hours and conference calls in the middle of the night, and when we get back to our offices, the availability of food and benefits in HR and all these things that allow us to cope in an increasingly difficult and stressful world. This is part of how we help our colleagues manage communication chaos. And then the second strategy is around conversation. As humans, next slide, we're built to interact with and be connected to people. And one of the things that we've been doing in the last year is what we call better conversations every day. So we've gotten to the essence of how do we have better conversations? What are some of the tools and techniques where we more deeply connect with people? And if we can do that, and we have one client that's run it through the entire organization as a cultural change intervention, if we can do that, better conversations, scaled out throughout an organization, so many benefits happen to that. And the core skills, which I'm not going to get into in a whole lot of detail, but it's these four: listening to understand, listening deeply, asking powerful questions, challenging and supporting each other, and engaging with each other on next steps and mutual accountability. So the recap on this one, again, it's an oldie but goodie, but the best way to communicate, to combat communication overload is to help people to be more resilient, to build a culture of strong communication and support of human interaction, and to give people these conversation or coaching skills so that the interactions that they have are world-class. So these are just as a quick review, and you'll get all these slides. Here are the 5 disruptive trends, and hopefully Cheryl and I articulated some of the underlying issues that come up with these.
Thanks, Dave.
And
I think when we just think about the disruption is the human element. We can navigate disruptive change. We can have new mindset. We can have bold leadership. We can have the engine of human capability. And we are really all very understanding. We're in the midst of this with you. We believe that our world's future and recovery from the coronavirus depends on strong leadership that creates a strong belief that the human spirit is resilient. And so our humanity is going to be that big bridge to tomorrow. With that, Dave, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, so kind of as a summary statement here, Cheryl and I wanted to convey the following, that forward-thinking leaders need to manage all kinds of polarities that are posed by viruses and technologies and other things that we talked about, focus on what makes us uniquely human. So we need to live in the present and at the same time basically teleport our minds and our bodies to potential future realities and build bridges to from those potential future realities back to the present. And so our hope for all of you is that you, your families, your loved ones, the communities that you are in, your colleagues, your teams remain safe and resilient, and that you continually learn during these extraordinarily challenging times. The world needs leaders more than ever before, and all of us need to step up in new ways to improve, if not save, humanity.
Thank you, Dave and Cheryl. Got some questions to start. Cheryl, was there one in particular you wanted to start with?
Well, I thought one was very interesting that really It's about what suggestions, or I'm sorry, it comes from a person who says, I'm an educational leader. And during this present challenge, I was thinking about how educational organizations and business and industry can work together to better ensure students can learn and parents can work, even when they're in their homes, in the same environment. And these trends seem to fit in regard to those considerations. And so the question for us, Dave, is what ideas do we have that can apply to that type of collaboration? I will say that I've enjoyed having conversations with people, neighbors, friends, colleagues at work, who are seeing the time at home to be an opportunity to come closer together, more activities being done. One family has adopted making some really rockin' dinners at night. I think also it's an opportunity to have those BCE conversations that Dave talked about, where really sitting and talking and visiting about what's the impact of this on us? What might our future look like? Why are we a little bit afraid? And sharing some of those powerful questions and discussions. Dave, do you have any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would say I would agree with that. And I think it really challenges our mindset here. You know, so many parents who work outside of the home say, how are we ever going to make this happen? And I think those kinds of comments, which are real, are comments that reflect the past paradigm. So maybe if we ask ourselves different questions, how do we engage with each other differently at home in the context of still working while thinking about what the world needs? And we are a little tribe within our home that's part of a larger ecosystem. So that's not well articulated, but I think if we just apply the same mindsets to the challenges that we face today, we won't innovate. So let's push ourselves to think differently about what the world has given us. And even when we're on the other side of this current pandemic, as we said at the very beginning, there will be other challenges, large and small, that we face. So from an agile innovation point of view, this is an opportunity right now to be thinking differently about how we as individuals and families and communities relate to the rest of the world.
I think that's well put. And another person has sort of extended this into a really interesting question. Works for a global manufacturing company, and the leadership team is under a shelter in place, but we have workers in other locations that are asked to work the plant floor because they're producing medical products. We want to keep up morale, and how do we communicate, especially with hourly workers? I think that one thing to consider, you know, CCL is sheltering in place as well. We have locations all over the world, and we have really adopted a virtual environment. We've set people up with various ways to access Teams, to do webinars, et cetera. I would say if workers don't have access to that, there may be some things you need to do with virtual stand-up meetings within the plants, if possible, other ways to try and access virtual technology as a group, if not as individuals. I think it is a tricky situation, though, and management by walking around is going to become important for leaders on the floor, and making sure that those leaders on the floor are well connected to the leaders who are sheltering in place.
I would say also a couple of organizations we know of have set up basically a 24/7 video connection on the shop floor. So you set up a Zoom or WebEx or FaceTime or Teams or Slack or whatever, and it's always available on a little monitor on the shop floor. And people who are not on the shop floor come and they work from their homes or from other offices, so that people on the shop floor can have contact via tech with people in the company that aren't working on the shop floor. So there's one idea among dozens that we can think of to take the current situation, take what we know about the need for human connection, use technology innovatively to continue to connect as an enterprise or as a team.
Thank you, Cheryl and David. We've reached the end of our time now, and we thank you for helping our audience develop a better understanding of the state of disruption and its implications for organizations. We want to remind our audience to download the research report, Talent Reimagined 2020, which is in your course materials, and we look forward to having you join us for a future webinar. Tomorrow, everyone who attended will receive a follow-up email with links to the webinar recording and our research report. As you exit the webinar, we hope you'll take a moment to complete the evaluation so we can continue to make these webinar events worth your time. Thank you and be safe.
Thank you, everyone. This actually concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts.
Right now.